Thanks for joining us this afternoon to hear more about We Will Chicago. This is the first citywide plan in more than 50 years. It presents a momentous opportunity for residents, stakeholders, and city leaders to create an inclusive vision for the city that encourages neighborhood growth and vibrancy while addressing long-standing social and economic challenges. If done well, this plan will help shape and track equitable strategies around housing, community and economic development, land use, transportation, and natural systems for years to come. I'm Christina Harris, Director of Land Use and Planning at the Metropolitan Planning Council, a planning and policy organization dedicated to creating a Chicago region that is equitable and sustainable. First, I'd like to acknowledge all of the partners that helped put this event together, including the Chicago Community Trust, the Center for Neighborhood Technology, the Department of Planning and Development, and the Mayor's Office for the City of Chicago. Each organization and department has been vital in supporting or leading pre-planning activities for We Will Chicago, and it was great to work with them on creating this event. And now, I'm excited to kick things off by introducing our dynamic panelists and moderators. Panelists today include Maurice D. Cox, Commissioner of the Department of Planning and Development. Since 2019, Commissioner Cox has led DPD's economic development, planning, and zoning functions while fostering community improvement initiatives throughout the city. His primary focus is underinvested neighborhoods on the South and West Sides. Helene D. Gale is President and CEO of the Chicago Community Trust, one of the nation's oldest and largest community foundations. Under her leadership, since October 2017, the Trust has adopted a new strategic focus on closing the racial and ethnic wealth gap in the Chicago region. Candace Moore is the City of Chicago's first Chief Equity Officer under the Office of the Mayor. Candace is charged with building out the newly created Office of Equity and Racial Justice. The department is overseeing the development, coordination, and administration of racial and social equity policies and practices for the City of Chicago. Aaron Harkey is the first Deputy Commissioner of the City of Chicago's Department of Cultural Affairs and Special Events. DCASE is responsible for overseeing programming, external events, facilities, finance, marketing, partnerships, special projects, and human resources. Aaron maintains a dual role as a Senior Policy Advisor for Arts and Culture, Office of the Mayor, wherein she advises on cultural policy and arts strategy across all city departments and agencies. The panelists will open the event with presentations interspersed with questions from the moderators. Then there will be time for a conversation between the panelists and moderators based on questions and topics registrants for this event submitted through a pre-event survey. Moderators for today's event include Grace Chan McKibben, Executive Director at the Coalition for a Better Chinese American Community, a coalition which unites the resources of neighborhood organizations to engage in civic education, issue-based advocacy, policy and planning, and community mobilization to empower Chinese American communities in Greater Chicago. Jason Estromera, Executive Director of the Northwest Side CDC. Jason provides administrative management, budget oversight, and organizational leadership, including the development and implementation of strategic objectives and organization initiatives that maintain the integrity and identity of a Latinx commercial district and neighborhood. And Will Tippins, Vice President of Architecture and Planning at Related Midwest, an expert in land entitlement, master planning, and historic preservation. Will joined Related Midwest in 1996. In his current role, he manages and coordinates all municipal agency communications relating to zoning, entitlements, building permits, and other work with regulatory agencies. Before we get started, I want to note that the Q&A box is open for any and all questions. After this event, answers to those submitted questions will be provided as part of an email follow-up. We have Mayor Lightfoot joining us today to start the event. Welcome, Mayor Lightfoot. So now I'll turn it over to her for some brief opening remarks.
Thank you, Christina, and thank you all who are gathered. As Christina noted, we have not had a comprehensive land use plan in the city of Chicago since 1966. Seems amazing, but true. There's a very famous portrait, a photograph of Mayor Richard J. Daley, and gathered around him are city employees and business people, all white men, looking at a plan of Chicago. And back then in those days, that's what passed for inclusive engagement. Very different time in our city today. And one of the things that I have heard both on the campaign and in my time as mayor is that this yearning for a better sense of land use, that we want how and when and under what circumstances land is developed to be determined through data, through public engagement, and a thoughtful process, and not just being dictated through the vagaries of developers and their sensibilities. With due respect to the development community, we can do better than what we've done, particularly over these last few years, where we've been hard pressed to see meaningful efforts south of Roosevelt Road and west of Ashland. And we have a chance to right that wrong and chart a very different path for Chicago that takes in consideration a variety of factors that are really born of community conversations. It's not like there hasn't been planning. There have been neighborhood quality of life plans. There have been neighborhood specific use plans, but we need to bring this process together in a thoughtful plan for Chicago will be the foundation on which we build a great, robust, equitable, and inclusive future. So I just want to say thank you to all who have gathered. Thank you for the conversations that have already taken place. Thank you to our partners in this effort, each and every one of you, particular MPC, as well as Chicago Community Trust. And I know you're going to be treated to a very thoughtful, interesting, and thought-provoking conversation. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Christina to start the panel discussion. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you, Mayor Lightfoot. We really appreciate that grounding as this important work continues. We don't have much time today, so let's get started. Our first presenter is Commissioner Cox, who will be providing an overview of We Will Chicago.
Hello, can I be seen? Are you able to see me?
Your video is off. If you turn it on, we can see you.
Can you see me now? Are you able to see me now?
Yes, we can
Thank
see
you. So again, thank you. Thank you, Mayor Lightfoot, first of all, for your courage in taking on this almost generational, audacious effort on behalf of Chicagoans. And Candace Moore, our first City of Chicago Chief Equity Officer and my partner on this journey. Just hello, everyone. It's great to see you virtually. I'm delighted to be part of today's conversation with on Chicago's first citywide plan in more than 50 years. My department, the Department of Planning and Development, is the city's principal planning and economic development agency. We're privileged to be leading this effort on behalf of Mayor Lightfoot and with the mayor's office. And we hope that your ongoing participation will help us to set the course for the city that we deserve, a more equitable and resilient Chicago. I'm just going to take a few minutes to talk about the status of the We Will plan, its main themes, upcoming public engagement efforts, and what we hope the plan will accomplish. It's at its most basic function, a citywide plan is a roadmap that guides the policies and establishes the strategies that help the city meet its goals. So Chicago has created a lot of community-specific plans and industry-specific plans for many, many decades. But this overarching city effort will be a first for most people who live and work here. First, let's discuss why we're doing a plan on a citywide level as opposed to select regions or geographies of the city. Some of you may be familiar with this map generated by the Flores Center at the University of Illinois in Chicago. These two maps encapsulate the overarching issues that have occurred in Chicago since the last time we did a plan, which was in the 1960s. What you see so vividly illustrated here is the redistribution of community wealth from the South, the Southwest, and the West sides to a very select set of neighborhoods on the North and the Northwest sides of Chicago. It has been a 50-year trend based on household incomes. More wealth and population growth to the north and downtown, less wealth and population decline on the west, the southwest, and the south sides. It's a pretty succinct encapsulation of the broader set of disparities that hundreds of thousands of Chicagoans experience every day. We should all applaud Mayor Lightfoot's commitment to addressing these structural inequalities that are exemplified by the 2017 map and that have plagued Chicago's for a generation. I think the beauty of planning is that the same policies that created this map can redraw this map fundamentally. So I believe it's our generation that is being called to lead the next generation, to lead the next generation a policy guide that addresses the issues of our time. And they are equity and resiliency on a citywide basis. So, next slide. Fortunately, we are not the first city of our size to do this. Citywide plans may be a little unusual here in Illinois, but they are absolutely routine in nearly every peer city in the country, and they update their citywide plans continuously. That includes Boston, New York, Los Angeles, and others, just to name a few. It's partly the reason why the populations of these cities are growing and why Chicago's instead is declining. I think this absence of a unified vision of how we want to grow is part of the challenge we face. And coming up with a unified vision can be, I believe, a big part of the solution. So, next slide. The intention of undertaking the We Will plan, it was announced last August, if you remember. And so what have we been doing since then? And what were our initial steps that we've taken this winter and spring? Essentially, we spent these months planning for a plan by talking to hundreds of neighborhood residents across the entire city to find out what issues really mattered most to them. And we learned about their priorities, their needs, about their desires and their fears, and about their hopes and dreams of what it means to be a Chicagoan. We heard a lot. Go to the next slide. And the discussions helped us to create a structure for conversations that we'd like to continue having today. including about the principles and themes and pillars that will give the plan its form and its function. As you can see from this infographic, we will be founded on two guiding principles: equity and resiliency. Equity is essential to address the structural racism, the depopulation, the poverty, and health disparities that we know all too well exist in our city. And resiliency really is about helping people to survive, to adapt, and to overcome multiple crises like illness and job loss. It also speaks to a more essential threat, that of climate change and pandemics. And from those principles, there are 5 guiding themes. We also took the time to define and refine these guiding themes as with the assistance of the Metropolitan Planning Council, which facilitated for us a series of workshops with other cities. And the themes that we would hope will drive an inclusive planning process address a need for one, a historical reckoning and a rebuilding of community trust. Another, just the need for a systematic evaluation of equity impacts in our community, and meaningful, and I mean deep, community engagement in this process. And also the need for accountability and transparency in how we apply public policy, and to build the interagency cross-collaboration which will execute the citywide plan. There are 7 pillars, and each of these themes will play an important role around the 7 core pillars. Next slide. They involve arts and culture. If you can go to the arts and culture, the 7 pillars. Yes, thank you. The arts and culture, starting from the upper left, this pillar is really intended to provide a planning framework that celebrates, enhances, and amplifies Chicago's vibrancy for the creation and the appreciation of artistic works. The economic development pillar is intended to foster policies and actions that create a wealthier, more equitable economy for all Chicagoans, residents and workers. The environment, climate, and energy pillar, this involves weather, the air we breathe, the water we drink, and climate conditions on Chicago and our resources to mitigate their impact. And then there's housing and neighborhoods. The housing and neighborhoods pillar addresses where people live and the places we raise our families. Lifelong education. This pillar acknowledges that learning almost never stops for anyone who consistently is seeking self-improvement. And then there's health, public health, and safety. This pillar will address the care of people and neighborhoods during times of well-being, as well as times of crises. And then lastly, the transportation and infrastructure pillar, which involves the transit of people, the movement of goods and information with vehicles, networks, and systems. So what will We Will Chicago accomplish? So today, together, we are organizing around these themes and pillars, and we aspire to deliver outcomes that resonate throughout the city as one city, especially in terms of the criteria and standards that guide land use and zoning decisions, neighborhood and regional plans, annual budgets and capital projects, innovative and equitable public financing tools, and community-based public decision-making. So currently, believe it or not, we have no systemic standards of this kind today. So I want to talk a little bit about a snapshot of how this planning process will play out. We are in the, if you can go to the next phase, we are in the mobilization phase and the pre-planning that started last year. This led to a kind of research and action planning that we are now prepared to engage in this year. The bottom of this slide shows where we are in the public process, which increasingly ramps up in the months ahead. You may have seen our presentation already at the City Plan Commission earlier this spring, when we also provided City Council with an update and previewed what was to come. So our collective goal is to present the We Will Plan for review and adoption, both by the Plan Commission and the City Council late next year. And then we'll move immediately into implementation. Next slide. So I wanted to note that this is possibly the most coordinated effort that the city has undertaken in quite some time. The city has many, many other planning initiatives. They are moving forward that are, partly focused on equity and resiliency. They involve multiple departments, multiple agencies and sister agencies that some of them which are illustrated within the map here on the right. They include my own department's effort, Invest Southwest, that some of you may have heard of. DCASE has an effort, Arts 77 plan. The mayor's COVID recovery task force is a plan. The Department of Housing and the Chicago Housing Authority have a blueprint for fair housing, and there are many, many, many others. Each of these plans will help inform the We Will plan and vice versa, until eventually equity and resiliency are inherent in everything we do. None of this happens in a productive and meaningful way unless there is extensive public and private involvement touching tens of thousands of people in our city. Some near-term items that you should be aware of. Applications for the We Will Advisory Council and research teams is going to be available for residents to apply for. And we are creating paid opportunities for community partners to be engaged in a number of these processes. So We Will Chicago already has a dedicated website. To get involved, you can go to the We Will website at wewillchicago.com, where you will find my call to arms which is to submit applications that will be available online starting next week in both English and Spanish. What you can do right now, starting now, you can register right away for our planning updates. So you will know what's coming at any given time. And then the same website will allow you to take a post-kickoff survey that we will collect. You'll be able to read and submit comments and learn about any upcoming neighborhood event that we hopefully will be live and in person very, very soon. And then lastly, before I close, the next slide. We'll also, I'd like to mention that you'll start seeing more and more public service messages that look like this. They'll be in trains, on buses, in kiosks, and on digital billboards throughout the city. And you'll know exactly what they mean. It's a sign that we are creating a strong, equitable, and resilient city. And it will also answer who will be doing it. We will. It'll be us. And we will do this together. So I'm really excited and very anxious to have the conversation begin. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Commissioner Cox. That was super informative, and I know that there's many people that haven't been a part of the process to date, and I know that was very, very helpful. I'm Will Tippins, and as Christina mentioned at the beginning, we asked registrants to provide us with questions in advance of today's conversation. Before we go on to the next speaker, there is one question that I would like to ask you, Commissioner.
Mm-hmm.
Can you further explain the difference between the We Will Chicago plan and what I think many people are more familiar with, which is a physical master plan? And more specifically, how will the We Will Chicago plan help guide neighborhood development versus how a master plan would help guide neighborhood development?
That's a great question. And I think what we're talking about is a plan that establishes a set of policies that guide our decision-making process with regard to zoning, with regard to the city's annual budgets and capital projects, to the kind of financing tools, TIF is just one, and the public decision-making process. All of those are a part of this citywide framework. And it will also assure that, that Chicago has a way of growing, that the growth is not disproportionate, that it is citywide, and that we are maximizing the resources, both land and cultural and human resources that are spread throughout our city. So that's really how I frame it. You know, in the 1960s, they were really concerned primarily, almost exclusively about, you know, downtown. It certainly fostered, you know, improvements, physical improvements in neighborhoods, neighborhood parks, and in libraries and schools. But today, I think, you know, in a city that has an economy the size of a country like Switzerland, we can't continue to be segmented by race and by class. Opportunity has to be pervasive throughout the city. And I think this plan, if we do this right, will leave a roadmap for the next generation well beyond any mayoral term. And that's what's so exciting about what Mayor Lightfoot is allowing us to do.
Great, thanks. And now we're going to want to keep it moving. We have a number of even equally informative speakers today. So I would like to, at this point, turn it over to Helene Gale.
Great, thank you so much. And as the head of the Chicago Community Trust, I'm happy to be here to talk about We Will Chicago, a plan that we believe can really be an instrument for equity. I never thought I would be so excited to talk about a city plan, but in fact, I am because of what we have been through and where we want to go as a city. I think all of us know that for the last year, we have seen the effects of inequity, whether it's at our grocery stores, our hospital, our funeral homes, as COVID-19 has wreaked havoc on our city, and particularly in Black and Latinx communities. Chronic disinvestment in communities and businesses, combined with conditions that have exacerbated health risks, have left communities of color uniquely vulnerable to this virus and to its economic consequences. For some, this has been a wake-up call, but for others who've been living with this inequality and inequity all of their lives, it was just another example of what decades of disinvestment, inattention, and bad policy will sow. I'm an epidemiologist, public health physician by background, and as an epidemiologist, I like numbers. So let me give you a few to consider. First, 30. That's the life expectancy gap between residents of Englewood and Streeterville. 4.6. Chicago's majority white communities receive 4.6 times the investment compared with Black communities and 2 times the investment compared with Latinx communities. 77, 50, and 2.6 million. Our city has 77 community areas, 50 wards, and nearly 2.6 million residents. Lastly, 55. It has been 55 years since the city put out a comprehensive plan that brings together those 77 community areas and the people that call them home. These numbers represent much of what We Will Chicago is aimed at achieving. Communities spend a lot of time and resources identifying their needs and priorities. They put together excellent neighborhood plans, but they often stop short of implementation. Why? Because they lack the institutional support and financial capital to implement. A citywide plan can connect community priorities with overall city priorities. A citywide plan is a good way to encourage communities and City Hall to work collaboratively in pursuit of a shared vision. It also assures that there's both transparency and accountability. Our residents want to know where the resources are going and why. They want some predictability and assurance. A citywide plan, if done well, puts it all out there. The city as a whole gets to understand what its priorities are. And if done right, it can become more than just a city plan. It can be an instrument for equity. It can be the people's plan. And this approach is a win-win for everybody. Investing in the communities that have been left out and left behind will benefit all of us. At the Trust, we've called closing the racial wealth gap between Latinx, Black, and white households Chicago's moonshot. We believe doing so can chart a new course of economic mobility and progress for our entire region. Economic inequity is at the root of our region's most significant challenges, from a stagnant economy to public safety to health to family well-being. It has slowed the economic progress for our entire region. I believe that if we all get behind We Will Chicago, it can play an important role in building a more just and inclusive city that works well for all of us. To build back better and more resilient, we need the public, the private, and the civic communities all involved and working together. We're all responsible for creating a city that's livable for everyone. We all live, work, and play here. And if we succeed here, the Chicago region can serve as a model for the country in what it really takes to build back better and stronger and more equal, and possibly transform the systems and the ways of doing business that have held us back for far too long. So again, I am enthusiastic about this. Count us as a real partner in this effort. You know, we will do our part to make sure that We Will Chicago is a successful plan and truly an instrument for equity.
Thank you, Helene, for that insight into the project. I'd like to ask you a question. Can you provide an example of how you envision different sectors working together to improve a plan in a strategic way?
Yes, well, you know, as I mentioned, I think it's going to take all of us and working across sectors. And so, you know, if we look at where businesses are thinking about putting headquarters or you know, branch locations, you know, that can be done in a way that looks at development and equity across the city. If people, you know, if residents are able to talk about what are the things that they need for their communities and give input into, you know, where developers locate different projects, you know, all of those things. I think it's really having this two-way or three-way dialogue between the business sector, communities, nonprofits, and government, where we, I guess that's a four-way conversation, but where we all are thinking about what are the needs from a human perspective, and then who has the resources to deliver that. And I think if we think about how we put people at the center of this plan and the needs, so that we have neighborhoods, that all of our neighborhoods have the basic things that we all need to live, work, play, you know, worship, all the things that we want within our neighborhoods, and having those within reach. You know, I think we can have a city where there is where each neighborhood provides what its residents need to have a high quality of life and meet their basic needs.
Great. Thank you so much for answering that question. We're going to head on over now to hear some remarks from Candace Moore. Thank you, Helene.
Thank you, everyone, and it's good to be with you today. My name is Candace Moore. I serve as the Chief Equity Officer for the City of Chicago, and I want to take a few minutes of my time to both share with you a little bit about what we do and what we've been up to. So I am the city's first Chief Equity Officer, and I have the tall task of building out the Office of Equity and Racial Justice. And what we seek to do is advance institutional change that result in equitable transformation of how we do business across the city of Chicago. In particular, we lift up a framework that has been supported by the Government Alliance on Race and Equity, which is an organization that works with city governments across the country around a theory of change that says to really institutionalize equity into governments, into institutions, we need to think about what does it take to normalize the conversation around race, organize ourselves for transformational change, and ultimately operationalize new practices, policies, and procedures that are going to result in more fair and just outcomes. A way I commonly talk about this is that there isn't a finish line when it comes to advancing racial equity. Instead, our goal is to strengthen a muscle for equity strong enough to build a more equitable Chicago. And I think that analogy of thinking about this work as building a muscle in our city really is the way that we could and should think about what it takes to build equity. Next slide. So one of the ways in which we've been approaching building that muscle is through the initiative Together We Heal. This was an initiative that paired this sort of strategic thinking about what does it take to create institutional change with also acknowledging and reckoning with the moment that we are in, the moment we are going through as a city, as a country, and ultimately in our mark in history. And so this framework provides sort of strategic thinking about what does it take, what can we do to support healing in communities, healing work that is already happening, healing work that needs to grow. What does it take to lead a public and collective reckoning, a reckoning with our history, a reckoning with our present? And what does it take to own and build institutional transformation? How do we drive an organizational change effort that isn't just about this moment, isn't just about a single plan, but is ultimately about how we do business and how we will continue to do business as a city? Next slide. And so for Together We Heal, we started off with supporting community-led efforts. So back toward the end of last year, we launched Together We Heal around community challenge for folks to lift up and engage healing activities that they were doing in their communities and that they would commit to doing. And we had this virtual summit to actually culminate or to highlight a lot of the work that we had seen. Recognizing that this was not the end, but an opportunity for us to coalesce and to vision together. And in this summit, we were able to lift up local artists in our communities who heal us through spoken word and music, to witness a frank conversation between the mayor and the governor about what this moment has meant to them as leaders, what they've experienced, as they think personally and in their leadership positions about the moments that we are in, to lift up work that is happening in the city right now around evaluating our memorials and our monuments, a marker of how we honor people, places, and events across our city, and really think about what does it mean what do we want our city to look like? What do we want our city to reflect? We lifted up local work. Many folks are connected to some really powerful work that Tanika Johnson has been leading with the Folded Map Project, and other local leaders who had engaged in these healing efforts and shared their perspectives on what is happening and what still needs to happen. And we did this together. Over 1,000 viewers across the city engaged in that moment. And if you go to the next slide, we also made a commitment to two particular things. We wanted to build what we're calling the equity statement of principles. This is a statement that allows us to define equity, to lift up what matters and what is important to us as we talk about equity, as well as continuing this drumbeat around healing that is happening and continues to be a desperate need of our city. And if you go to the next slide, for the equity statement of principles, we used our convening opportunity to connect to one another, to ask the question, what does racial healing look like to you? What does equity look like to you? What does resiliency look like to you? And we asked, as people shared this, to put themselves on the map so we could see where comments were coming from, to see the spread of who was able to respond to this. And with a few exceptions, some folks pinned themselves in the lake, but we were able to kind of see the breadth of feedback that we got, and also produce a set of words that vision how people are thinking about healing and grappling with healing across our city. In addition to this, we also had conversations and engagements where we gathered together to talk about what is the definition of healing look, or equity look like, and what does could a year of healing look like? And so if we go to the next slide, I'm pleased to share with you, me and my team, along with our partners at DPD and across the mayor's office, have been working pretty feverishly to take in all of that feedback and share out a draft definition of equity that would be a part of the equity statement of principles that was really lifted up across our shared thoughts. And so here is a draft definition in a simple way of defining equity. The city of Chicago defines equity as both an outcome and a process that results in fair and just access to opportunity and resources that provide everyone the ability to thrive. I say simple definition because one of the things that's really important is that we also include a more expanded definition that really lifts up some more of the nuanced concepts that people named and that are really essential. And so if you go to the next slide, it's a lot of text, fair warning. So I'm just going to read it, but you'll also have access to this in a slide. But this is the fuller definition. As an outcome, equity results in fair and just access to opportunity and resources that provide everyone the ability to thrive. Acknowledging the present and historical inequality that persist in our society, equity is a future state we strive to create where identity and social status no longer predestine life outcomes. As a process, equity requires a new way of doing business. One that prioritizes access and opportunities for groups who have the greatest need, methodically evaluates benefits and burdens produced by seemingly neutral systems and practices, and engages those most impacted by the problems we seek to address as experts in their own experiences, strategists in co-creating solutions, and evaluators of success. And racial equity specifically focuses on the social construction of race and how it has been used historically and presently to unjustly distribute opportunity and resources based on a person's skin color, heritage, ethnicity, and/or national origin. Advancing racial equity requires an analysis of systemic racism, inclusive of the ways harm is created at the individual, interpersonal, institutional, and structural levels. It also requires a commitment to dismantle systems that perpetuate racialized outcomes and rebuild systems that produce systemic inclusion. This is the draft of all of the feedback that we have gotten throughout the Together We Heal experience. And our goal is actually to put out this draft in early next month and create a final public comment period. This definition and the equity statement of principles that we hope to create are foundational, both to the work of We Will Chicago, but ultimately to the work that we want to continue to build across the city. So I am deeply excited and grateful for all of the feedback. And as we march toward finalizing this statement, we really want this to be a process that we can sort of move forward together. Next slide. And I also want to preview for folks the Year of Healing. So this was another area coming out of the Together We Heal work. And so what we want to do with the Year of Healing is we want to catalyze momentum to advance racial healing in Chicago by amplifying and connecting existing initiatives and nurturing and promoting new initiatives across our city. Over the next year, we'll spearhead signature activities, coordinate resources, and provide a platform to increase visibility. The framework that we want to use is reflecting on our past, reclaiming our present, and reimagining our future. And so we look forward in the early summer to really launching the Year of Healing, which I think is absolutely critical to the foundational work that we want to do, the planning work that we want to do. We must create an environment in which we are healing and equity is our discipline, that it breathes life into the work that we do every day. And so with that, I am just incredibly excited about this work. I'm incredibly excited about the contributions we have all made to it. I am honored to be in a position in which I get to partner with communities and direct and try to move forward these efforts, as well as partnering with my colleagues in city government to breathe life and breathe this into the work that we are doing. So thank you, everyone, and onward as we continue to build for We Will Chicago.
Thank you so much, Candace. We're so happy that there is the Office of Equity and Racial Justice established for all this work. But one question that we have from is, how does the work of the Office of Equity and Racial Justice get incorporated, or equity principles in general, into the We Will Chicago process? Can you give some concrete examples of how that's incorporated?
Yeah, no, this is a great question. A big way I think about this is that we want to, equity is a muscle that we're building, right? And in order to really build out that muscle, we need to think about how equity is a part of our mindset, how equity is a part of our process, and then equity is also a part of how we measure results. And specifically, things like the equity statement of principles are essential to helping us get on the same page about our mindset. How do we define equity? How are we going to talk about this work? How do we build capacity to engage and to learn on all of the things that we committed to as part of this equity statement of principles? As part of our process, there's an opportunity as we engage in the historical reckoning component of the We Will Chicago work, as we think about our community engagement efforts, as we think about lifting up tools like racial equity impact assessments and other tools around equity, and we embed those into different choice points that we have throughout the plan. And I'm grateful that the team of We Will Chicago is really thinking deeply about how these tools are utilized throughout the process. And then ultimately, how we measure it. Will we ask the questions that call out who has been historically harmed and how we want to see things move forward, how we want to fix things? And will we measure our progress by that? Will we break down data by race, by identity, so that we can really understand if things are working, and will we be accountable to those results? Those are the specific ways that we will breathe life into the work. But it is so essential that we have that common foundation. And so I think this work that we are building together right now are the seeds that we have to nurture and that need to grow in order to really operationalize it in the work.
Thank you so much, Candace. We are coming to the last speaker of today, and let us turn over to Erin Harkey from the Department of Cultural Affairs and Special Events.
Hi, everybody. I am Erin Harkey. I'm really grateful and honored to be in this conversation and in the kickoff of this extremely important initiative, We Will Chicago. So prior to the COVID-19 pandemic, the arts and culture sector was a significant employer and economic driver in the city of Chicago, generating billions in revenue and supporting thousands of jobs. But the pandemic has devastated the sector, and its effects have been particularly severe here in Chicago. According to a report produced by Arts Alliance Illinois, Chicago ranks number 2 among peer regions for decreases in creative occupations since the onset of COVID-19, alongside some really staggering losses in revenue and in unemployment. Some estimates we have are that arts and culture sector unemployment is close to 40%. Not surprisingly, the pandemic has affected minority artists and minority-owned cultural organizations more than others. 66% of unemployed artists that are self-reported are Black, Indigenous, and people of color, BIPOC. And we're also seeing 20% more revenue loss among smaller BIPOC arts and culture organizations compared to their predominantly white counterparts. So the good news, if there is any good news in that, is that the arts are actually in a really unique position to aid in our city's recovery. According to recent studies by Americans for the Arts that analyzed perception of the arts and arts impact during the pandemic, which I thought these were fascinating. 90% of Americans believe that arts and culture activities are important to their quality of life. 72% of Americans believe the arts unify our communities. 76% of artists have used their art, right, to raise morale during the pandemic, and 83% of creative workers are ready to put their creative practice to use as part of our national recovery. Last week, the city announced, in partnership with sister agencies and departments across the city, Art 77, which is a new citywide arts recovery and reopening plan for all of Chicago's 77 community areas, representing an initial investment of over $60 million to support local artists and arts organizations. That's just the beginning. We will have additional announcements in the upcoming weeks to provide more direct relief to artists and organizations. Art 77, I think for us, really signals a new direction for Chicago's cultural policy, in which the arts are embedded in initiatives and strategies across city government. And the plan seeks to do a couple of things. The first is to expand access and participation in the arts citywide, prioritize employment of creative workers through city programs and services, and 3, really deepen public sector investments. And I'll go a step further in public sector commitment, right? And the creative sector through increased financial support and cultural policy development. To thrive post-pandemic, the city can really leverage, right, the power of arts and culture sector, putting creative workers to work, rebuilding, reimagining, unifying, and healing our neighborhoods. But I think it's also really critically important that we also, affirmatively support and acknowledge and stand with communities, in particular our Black and Brown communities, to dismantle racist systems and structures that prohibit, right, our equitable growth and prosperity. Next slide. Next slide, please. Great, thanks. One of the core programs of Art 77 initiative, which will help us achieve these goals, is the arts participation in the We Will Chicago plan. I want to especially acknowledge the leadership of Commissioner Cox here, because it was DPD's idea, which I think is a really good indicator of the opportunities that are available to the cultural sector, and that the work is not siloed in one area, because it's not true in life, and it's not how culture is practiced. It's an intrinsic action that is central, right, to how we live and how we relate to one another. So it's nice to have colleagues across government get that. So thank you again, Commissioner Cox, and also Candace Moore, for your continued partnership to kind of really integrate the arts as part of our collective work. There are some key interests here and kind of core goals or questions that we want to ask. The first is, what do we want to keep? What do we want to change? What is urgent right now? There are lots of urgent issues, right, that we need to address and prioritize. What is also real is that, communities are experiencing planning fatigue. If you go back to the slide that Commissioner Cox presented, there's a lot of people asking a lot of communities in terms of their participation and to participate and helping to, envision new paths forward. So why is this different, right? Why do we need a plan? And what are the incentives that we can give people to participate? What did they get back for their participation? And what does reciprocity really look like in this process? And for our part, it is really asking the question of how we position artists in this work, how we position organizers and residents, and other local stakeholders as experts, knowledge contributors, and problem solvers to address the critical issues that are facing our communities today. Next slide, please. So to start this work, we initiated a call for artist teams to help us kind of lead this process. And we were extremely fortunate that Honeypot Performance answered the call. Honeypot Performance is a creative Afro-feminist nonprofit. And I'm going to say that again because it sounds good to say it. Honeypot Performance is a creative Afro-feminist nonprofit. And I think if you juxtapose that with the image that Mayor Lightfoot referred to in her opening remarks, I am, proud to say it because it sounds and feels like progress to me. But since 2001, Honeypot has really cultivated an approach to performance, integrating movement, theater, to examine the ways that people, negotiate their identity and belonging and difference in their lives and their cultural memberships. Through their performances and, robust kind of public humanities program and like their really kind of deep focused engagement that they do, they really try to uplift, right, the everyday ways of how we value each other, right, and how we value ourselves. Next slide, please. So Honeypot Performance will lead a team of artists through this process. Artist teams have been selected and then will align with the pillars that you have heard us talk about. Artist teams will engage in a kind of two-part approach through community hubs and neighborhoods, and also through kind of a framework of mobile artist teams that will kind of be on the go, engaging with different communities. We plan on having, workshops and conversations and design exercises and skill sharing activities to really help activate, right, new ideas and new concepts and new ways of thinking about these issues. And of course, all of this will be infused with art, creativity, culture, and fun. The artist teams will then develop an action plan and a creative output based on the core ideas that emerge. And the communities will work with the artist teams to realize these outputs as sort of like a creative work or a series of creative programs or other public-facing actions. Next slide. These are the artists and organizing teams that will be assigned to the different pillars. We just finalized them last week. And among this team, you have, youth leaders, community gardeners, arts administrators, muralers, dancers, and performance artists alongside, right, health and community kind of development activists. So it is a really well-rounded group of people that can not only kind of work on their, targeted pillar, but really we're developing a cohort here so that they can really kind of learn and grow and share to kind of get that consistency, not only vertically, but across. So the goal here also is that we will have recommendations that are, arts and culture specific, right? The things that arts and culture folks need, like funding and access to space. But also you'll see recommendations that are, creative in nature and approach integrated throughout the plan. And what this means, I think, for arts and more importantly for our communities in simple terms is kind of just a different way of thinking about resources and more resources to support creative jobs and work in our sector. And I think the outcome for our communities, right, is that there is an opportunity to use the arts as a sort of connective tissue between city services and the people that we serve. Next slide. So that's it. I just want to shout out the entire extraordinary Honeypot leadership team, and also encourage you to visit the Honeypot Performance website. There are still a few open opportunities for artists, and we're looking to continue to expand the network of people that we're working with. So please, if you know anybody that might be interested, please visit the site. And thanks so much for this opportunity. We're really very excited about this. And I think this is an important moment for Chicago and for, I think, planning in general. This will be a good moment.
Thanks. The inclusion of this creativity into this planning process, I'm very excited about seeing. And thank you for those remarks. I've been watching the chat, and there's been these questions coming up about how the arts are going to be incorporated. I do have one specific question for you, which I'm hoping you can answer, because I think many people are thinking about it, is how will these artist-led engagements, what might they look like when people take part in them? And then there will be these creative outputs from those engagements, and how can those get incorporated into the plan?
So it's kind of like TBD, right? I think, you know, part of working with artists is like, you don't really know, right, what you're going to get. So hopefully we're hoping that the kind of engagements that they construct are a little bit out of the box, so that, you know, there really is an incentive for people to participate, and it's not just a, you know, exercise, although this is, you know, helpful too, of like kind of sticking Post-it notes on places so that the act of planning, right, might not actually feel like you're in a planning exercise at all, right? That's the goal. And I imagine that it will be, you know, obviously multidisciplinary. So we'll have artists of all stripes and colors participating: visual artists, performance artists, dancers, musicians. I mean, like really, you know, multimedia. Like there's just really no limit, right, to how we can kind of, with creativity, and how we can approach this. And in terms of kind of documentation, well, let me go back. In terms of how it shows up, I think that is a more kind of straightforward kind of documentation process. Like any planning process, we take data, right? This is all of it, a data gathering exercise. So we'll take the data that we gather from these events and activities and analyze them, and, you know, try to make sense of them, and then we'll feed that back out to the community to make sure that we got it right. So while it's creative, there is, you know, some, I think, tried and true ways of how this information then gets, you know, translated back to folks. And then I think the real kind of outcome that is exciting is that with these projects, we can start to see immediately like the plan come to life in real time, right? And so the projects that these artists create alongside communities immediately can take the recommendations and put them in a neighborhood. So that's, I think, where we're hoping to head. I hope that answered the question.
It's great. Thanks. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Candace and Will. And thank you to all the presenters, Commissioner Cox, Candace Moore, Helene Gale, Aaron Harkey, and Mayor Lightfoot for your insight into the citywide plan. Let's get a virtual round of applause for our presenters. This brings us to the Q&A portion of today. We are going to present questions from the most important stakeholders of this project, you, the people who call this city home. So thank you to everyone who took the time to ask some thoughtful, tough, and intentional questions about how this project can improve the city for all. I'd like to start the Q&A portion of today's program by asking questions regarding tackling disinvestment and inequality challenges in communities. So to the panel, how will this plan reimagine the way that the city thinks about equity and resiliency, and how the city invests in communities to create livable neighborhoods where people can thrive, in particular our youth?
Who wants to start?
Yeah, I was going to say, I don't know if you wanted to start, Commissioner Cox, or I can share. I have a couple of thoughts.
Go ahead.
So, I mean, one of the things when this question, when I heard this question that came to mind is just how important, and sometimes I think how fast we want to speed past the foundational building part. In order to have systemic change, we must be talking about systemic sort of investment and reimagining, and that's a process. And so many of these building blocks that we're going to build through the historical reckoning, through the community engagement, through building tools and building processes are going to be critical. And the key, I think, for any equity effort, but really for what we have in front of us, is to ask ourselves how these different layers will impact and influence then the next step. How will that shape how we think about the budgets that we create? How will that shape and hold us accountable to the data that we are looking at? I think that's how you begin to build equity, but then recognizing the challenge in front of us is deep and entrenched, and there are no quick fixes. So there are going to be lots of pain points along the way. To not anticipate those is the way I see it is often a mistake, but to recognize that we have to build foundational relationships that will allow us to challenge ourselves and to ultimately build the things, whether they are policies, practices, budgets, et cetera, that are going to continue to vision and push forward to a more inclusive state. So I think those are just sort of foundational things that have to be true for this work to happen.
Yeah, that's a great answer. And what I would add is what we're talking about is having a conversation about values, what we hold dear, and what we want to give to the next generation. So I think of someone who is a 20-year-old Chicagoan. We're doing a plan for them, a 30-year plan. They will be 50. So they will still be in those neighborhoods. And if they don't identify with the values that are in the plan, then none of this will have meaning. So we have to accept the moment that we're in, which we all know has been truly a racial awakening and an acknowledgement of the inequities. So we would be seriously remiss if we didn't capture that set of values and put it into a set of policies that are not just about your neighborhood, but they're about Chicago as a whole. And I just don't think we have taken the time, because it takes a bit of courage to do that. It takes a kind of healing that Candace has talked about. And that's the conversation that I hear people wanting to have. At the same time, we have to be building trust. Folks don't want to sit around and just talk. They want to see policies in action. And I think that's why initiatives like the Mayor's Invest Southwest are so meaningful. If we're talking about trying to create equitable development that leads to inclusive growth, we need to start having developers and developers of color rebuilding the South and West Side. And so we can't wait 2 years to talk about it, because we know the need is now. And I think if we continue to be intentional about our actions, people see us making and taking action, then that will sustain the longer, more deliberative conversation that we're trying to have citywide.
Thank you so much. I have a different question, and this is expressed by both folks before that have submitted questions before the panel, as well as throughout the chat today. How would any neighborhood plans, whether completed or in process, be incorporated into We Will Chicago? There are some specific examples that people have cited in the chat.
Right. And so we actually have the challenge, right, to bring all of these geography-specific, industry-specific plans into a holistic conversation. So if we keep it at the neighborhood level, people know their neighborhoods really well. They know what their aspirations are really well. But what happens when one neighborhood has a set of aspirations and another neighborhood has another? And they might be opposed to each other. And I actually think the Folded Map project is a classic example of what happens two homes, one on the south side and one on the north side, you fold the map, they're the same, but their value, the value of wealth that they're creating for that family, could be drastically different. So at some point, we need to bring those two sides together to have a single conversation about our shared aspirations. So for me, you will always have a neighborhood plan and a quality of life plan, but it has to be in conversation with 77 areas, community areas. And that's the kind of larger plan. Like, what do we want to be? Do we really want each of our neighborhoods to have a range of housing options that lead to a mix of income in an integrated Chicago? Or are we quite okay with having two separate Chicagos? I think that's a conversation that people want to have. And this plan will allow us to finally have this conversation. Are we satisfied with these two disparate Chicagos? Are we serious about creating one?
And another question that has come up in the chat as well as previous was, as all of you have spoken to, this cuts across many departments. And the question is, how will the city departments and staff be held accountable for implementing this plan? And how will the outcomes be tracked?
Well, I can take it from our perspective. You know, I think the kind of evaluation and the analysis, those metrics need to be built into how we design this process, so that we're not setting up that evaluation metric after the fact. We really need to be thinking about it from day one, right? In terms of really analyzing the impact of what we're doing, even through this conversation here today. So yeah, so that would be that. And I think that there is, you know, part of it that we're trying to do is also just kind of a culture shift. And I think that we are definitely looking for, I think, more kind of collaborative action amongst city departments and helping to you know, move real progress forward. And you can see that happening in the Invest Southwest initiative. And there's something in that collaboration that also forces kind of accountability, because you are all kind of in it together in a way that I think part of what is happening through this process will also kind of demonstrate that. So that's at least my hope for it anyway.
And I would just add quickly, you know, from my perspective in the Office of Equity, one of the things I'm really interested in is how do we build sort of shared mindsets, shared tools, and shared sense of accountability across the city. So the equity statement of principles, very much at this stage, we're building right in partnership with We Will Chicago. We're very, very grateful and very, very excited that We Will Chicago would be sort of like the first effort to really adopt it. But the key about building a tool like an equity statement of principles is that it is designed to live and be utilized in more than just that one effort. And I think that's really key, is that the tools that we build here should be things that we replicate, things that we share, things that we bring into other areas of the work. And so some of that is really the job of an equity office. Another area that I get really excited about as we talk about We Will Chicago is our ability to align data. There's a lot of good and rich data that the city captures, and sometimes it can be very siloed. So the opportunity to feed into the different systems and things that are being collected and create a whole picture of our city, talk about outcomes, but also talk about what outputs, what do our departments put out, but as well as what are the outputs in the private sector? What are the outputs? Because all of that, you know, comes together to create the sort of shared experience. And so I think these are going to be really key pieces to also make sure that we're building some alignment so that we're walking through this culture change together.
You know, Candace, what I would say as well, part of the ultimate way of evaluating, are we living our values, is to look at the annual budget of a city, and you will understand what is important to that city. And so currently we don't have a values statement that we agree upon citywide to structure our capital budgets, how we expend and support the things that Chicago and citywide want. So I'm looking forward to that, being able to have that tool as well.
Great, thank you for that. If we can talk about a little more about how equity, the Year of Healing, artist-led engagements, and other activities can serve to build trust and heal the rifts embedded in the city's social fabric, including racial, educational, and economic inequalities.
Well, I think the good thing about the artists that we are working with is that this is very much a part of how they practice and how they part of an extension of their practices already. And so one of the early conversations that we had with Honeypot is even before we had, kind of the affirmation from the early planning exercises that this was central, important, and we needed to start there, was that they were coming to the table saying, like, we need to really, put it on the table and address this before we can kind of move forward. There are a lot of artists in the city. I think that Chicago is actually an extraordinary place, right, for the intersection of art, culture, and social justice movements. I think we have artists abound, right? It is actually in their DNA, and I would say that it is in the city's DNA, right, to really think about these things critically. And I can see we, as part of our Art 77 announcement, we actually gave out 5 $100,000 grants to Tanika Johnson, who Commissioner Cox referenced through the Folded Map Project. She's going to be doing a project about discriminatory land use sale contracts in Inglewood. We have a Native artist, Santiago X, who's going to be focusing on mound building, the Pilsen Housing Cooperative, also looking at ways to amplify the impacts of displacement and gentrification in our communities. So through these projects, I think we can, the artist projects, we can kind of tackle these issues head on.
And I'll just add that, for me, I love to plan. I love to talk about the future, but I also know that people can be fatigued by that. And so I tend to graft onto planning the things that people love. And arts and culture is our way in to have a conversation, because we all care about culture. We're all cultural beings. We all crave and love beauty. So we're inclined to attract to the art. So if I want to grab Chicagoans' attention, I graft on something I know they truly love, and that will hold and sustain us for a very, very long time. So I'm just thrilled that Aaron is there, and the DCASE is such a willing partner to allow us to use arts and culture as the convener for the conversation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I would definitely agree with that. When I think about something like healing and planning, like there's this almost sort of intellectual, I think, challenge people think about is like, how do you go from that to a plan or a policy change, et cetera? But what I've been really excited about this moment is that, through different efforts, and I think about Together We Heal, one of our challenges was to say, healing is happening all across our city and needs to happen more. And it's happening in different ways and in different spaces. How do we create channels, pipelines for this to flow into the change process and the change work that we all desperately need and want to see and want to produce different results? And so through the talent of artists, through the talent of storytellers, historians, and community folks, we can both have the independence to build what we need in the spaces that we are in, as well as contributed to sort of a larger, more collective process of going through and trying to change big systems. And so I think this moment is messy. It has a lot of different things, but I get very excited about the energy and the possibility that we can make from where we're at.
Great, thank you. I just want to be conscious of time. We're at 1:31, so I want to take this opportunity to thank all of our speakers, both panelists and moderators, for this really engaging, informative conversation today. I feel like this could go on for much longer, and it should. We Will Chicago has the potential to be a truly transformational process and vision. It is great to hear more about the principles, themes, and pillars guiding this plan, how equity is a defining principle, and how that is being shaped by the mayor's office, as well as the first of its kind process to incorporate the arts into a plan of this magnitude. Before we sign off, we want to reiterate the many ways that residents and stakeholders can participate in planning activities. To create a truly inclusive vision for Chicago, the city needs to hear from all of us. So I want to re-highlight how you and other Chicagoans can participate. You can apply to be part of a research team, advisory council, or serve as a community partner. And you can also engage with local artists at a neighborhood hub. This open application process allows for a greater opportunity to engage with more people than are often incorporated in planning activities, and I hope you take advantage of this opportunity. Please follow along via the We Will Chicago website. There you can stay up to date on progress, ask questions, and share your thoughts on what the city needs. Thank you all again for joining us this afternoon. The recording will be available on the We Will Chicago website to be shared more widely. And we hope to see you at a future We Will Chicago engagement. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.